The restaurant was glowing with golden lights that bounced off the polished marble floors. Soft jazz music played in the background, giving the air a sense of wealth and power. It was the kind of place where men wore tailored suits and women wore sparkling dresses that whispered when they walked. At the very center of it all sat Mr. Allen, a billionaire who was well known in the city not for his kindness, but for his money and the sharp arrogance that followed him wherever he went. He leaned back in his leather chair, surrounded by 4 of his closest business friends. They were laughing loudly, sipping wine that cost more than most people's rent. The sound of their voices filled the room, drowning out the quiet hum of other conversations. For them, the restaurant was not just a place to eat, it was their stage, and everyone else was the audience. Walking between the tables was a young waitress named Maya. She was tall, graceful, and carried herself with a quiet strength. Her skin was the color of rich mahogany, glowing warmly under the chandeliers. Her eyes, though tired from long shifts, still held a spark of determination. She had worked here for almost 2 years, balancing her studies with her job, pushing through exhaustion day after day. This restaurant was not just her workplace, it was her battlefield, where she fought for dignity and survival. When Maya approached the billionaire's table, her voice carried its natural rhythm. "Good evening, sir. Would you like me to bring out your appetizers now?" Her words were clear, but her accent was different, colored by her upbringing, shaped by the sounds of her family and community. It was part of her, something she never tried to hide. Mr. Allen smirked as he heard her speak. He leaned forward slightly, tilting his head like a predator who had found something amusing. "Appetizers," he repeated slowly, exaggerating every syllable. "Say that again. Maybe we'll understand you this time." His friends laughed, one slapping the table, another covering his mouth with a napkin to hide his grin. Their laughter echoed through the restaurant, sharp and cruel, piercing into Maya's chest like needles. The room shifted. Conversations dimmed. People turned their heads. The clinking of glasses and forks slowed. All eyes, it seemed, were on the young waitress who stood frozen by the billionaire's side. Maya's heart pounded, but her hands did not shake. She had been here before, not in this exact restaurant, not with this exact man, but in moments like this. Moments where her voice was treated like a mistake, where her identity was treated like a joke. She remembered the classrooms where teachers corrected her harshly, the playgrounds where children laughed at how she spoke, the jobs where managers whispered about whether she sounded professional enough. Yet here she was, standing tall, wearing her uniform with quiet pride. "Would you like me to bring your appetizers now, sir?" she repeated softly. Her voice did not crack. Her eyes did not lower. She looked directly at him, as if daring him to push further. Mr. Allen chuckled again, his smile widening as he turned to his friends. "Did you hear that? Oh, she's trying so hard. Maybe if she says it slowly enough, we'll get it. Go on, sweetheart, try saying that." His tone was sharp, mocking, dripping with the arrogance of someone who believed the world was his to control. A few customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman frowned deeply, while another man shook his head in quiet disapproval. But most of them stayed silent, afraid of speaking against power, afraid of being noticed. The billionaire's money was heavy enough to keep many mouths shut. Maya, however, did not flinch. Inside her, anger pressed against her ribs, but she held it steady, shaping it into strength. She knew men like him, men who believed that mocking others made them bigger, when in truth it only revealed how small they were. The silence of the room pressed down, heavier than the chandeliers above. Every second stretched longer, as if time itself was waiting to see what she would do. She inhaled slowly, the weight of her breath filling her chest. Her fingers tightened around the tray she carried, but her face remained calm. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Behind her, a little boy at a nearby table whispered to his mother, Why are they laughing at her? The mother hushed him quickly, pulling him close, but the words carried far enough for Maya to hear. And in that moment, her resolve grew stronger. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about every time someone had been belittled for being different. It was about every person who had been told they weren't enough. She stepped closer to the table, her shadow falling across the billionaire's white shirt. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not of joy, but of quiet defiance. She knew something they didn't. She carried a secret they could never imagine. And as the billionaire leaned back, confident that he had won, Maya held her head high. The laughter around the table swelled once more, but in her silence, there was power. Power that was about to shatter their arrogance like glass. The laughter that rolled from the billionaire's table did not stop quickly. It rose and fell in cruel waves, echoing through the restaurant like an ugly performance that no one had paid to see. The chandelier above sparkled as if nothing had happened, but for Maya, the light felt harsher now, like a spotlight forcing her to stand in the center of their mockery. Her cheeks warmed under the stares of strangers, but she did not lower her gaze. Inside her chest, her heart pounded like a drum, but her fingers still clutched the serving tray with steady strength. To give in, to shrink back, to let her shoulders fold, no, that was not who she was. She had carried too many burdens, fought too many battles, to let the smirk of one man break her spirit. Still, the sting was real. Each laugh from Mr. Allen and his friends cut deeper, like invisible whips snapping against her skin. The room was watching. She could feel it in the hush of other conversations, in the way forks paused in midair, in the way a waiter near the bar froze, not daring to step forward. Humiliation is a strange thing. It does not always roar, sometimes it whispers, crawling into your bones and reminding you of old wounds. And for Maya, those whispers grew louder now, pulling her mind backward in time. She remembered a classroom years ago, her hand raised high with excitement as she answered a teacher's question. Her answer had been correct, her knowledge sharp, but the children had laughed when her accent wrapped around the words. "Say it again," one boy had shouted, and the class had giggled. The teacher had hushed them, but the sound had already sunk deep into her chest. That day, she went home and locked herself in her room, practicing words in front of a mirror until her throat ached. She remembered her first job interview, dressed in her best second-hand blouse, sitting nervously in a stiff chair. She had spoken with confidence, but the manager's raised eyebrow said more than his polite smile. "We'll call you back," he had said, but the call never came. She had known why. It wasn't her skills, it was the way her voice carried her roots, her history, her difference. And now, here she was, in one of the richest restaurants in the city, being treated as if she were entertainment instead of a human being. Her eyes flicked around the room. At a corner table, a couple whispered to each other, their faces tied with discomfort. Near the bar, a man frowned but looked quickly away when Mr. Allen's laughter grew louder. Silence can be louder than cruelty sometimes, because silence says, "We see what's happening, but we will not stand with you." Maya inhaled deeply, pressing the air into her lungs like a shield. She had promised herself long ago that she would never let anyone erase her. She would bend, yes, because life demanded it, but she would not break. Mr. Allen leaned forward again, swirling the wine in his glass with a satisfied grin. "You see, gentlemen," he said loudly, as if the whole restaurant were his audience, "money can buy you the best food, the finest wine, and apparently, it also buys you entertainment." His friends chuckled again, their faces lit with false amusement, the kind of laughter people wear to stay close to power. Maya did not answer him. Not yet. Her silence was not weakness, it was a storm gathering, waiting for its moment. But her silence made the humiliation heavier, for it gave the impression, at least to those watching, that she was powerless. Inside, she fought to balance the fire in her chest with the discipline she had built over years of endurance. She remembered her mother's words, People will try to make you feel small. Let them try. But remember, dignity is something no one can take unless you hand it to them. Her mother had been a woman of strength, raising Maya and her younger brother through endless struggles. She had spoken those words one evening as she stitched old clothes by candlelight. Even now, in this glittering restaurant, Maya could almost hear her mother's steady voice. The sting of humiliation still burned, but beneath it was something else: resolve. Across the room, a little boy who had whispered earlier peeked again over his mother's shoulder. His wide eyes met Maya's for just a second. Innocent, curious, confused. In his look, she saw the reflection of her own younger self, the child who had once wondered why people laughed at her words, the child who had tried to change her voice to fit in. She would not let that child, or this boy, believe that mockery was stronger than dignity. She stood straighter. Her tray felt lighter now, though nothing had changed. Her silence became steady, no longer heavy with shame but strong with patience. She was waiting. Mr. Allen, noticing her refusal to answer, chuckled and shook his head. "Cat got your tongue?" he asked, raising his glass again. His arrogance filled the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. His friends leaned in, enjoying the show. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Maya's silence was not surrender. It was the pause before revelation. She had carried a gift within her for years, a skill earned through sleepless nights and endless determination. They thought she was a simple waitress, someone who could be mocked and dismissed. They had no idea what was about to come. And as Maya stepped back from the table, her lips curved slightly, not in fear, not in shame, but in quiet defiance. The humiliation they had tried to pin on her no longer stuck. It slipped off like rain on stone. She was ready. The sting of humiliation had been transformed into something far more powerful. Soon, the billionaire would learn that mocking her voice was the biggest mistake he could make. The restaurant was caught in a strange silence, the kind that settles after thunder but before lightning strikes again. Glasses stood half raised, forks hovered midair, and every pair of eyes flicked toward Maya, the young waitress who had become the unwilling star of the night. Mr. Allen's mocking grin still lingered on his lips, but his confidence seemed to grow thin in the heavy quiet. Maya stood there, her back straight, her eyes calm yet sharp. She had endured the sting of their laughter, the humiliation that dripped from their voices, and the cruel weight of silence from those who chose not to intervene. But deep inside her chest, beneath the layers of endurance and pain, something stronger had always been waiting. And now it was ready. She set the tray gently on a nearby side table, freeing her hands. She took one small step closer to Mr. Allen's table. The sound of her shoes against the polished floor echoed like a warning. A quiet hush swept through the room. Then, without hesitation, she opened her mouth. But this time, no English came out. Instead, her voice flowed in flawless Mandarin Chinese. The words rolled smoothly, like water over stone, precise and strong. Her tone carried the natural rhythm of someone who had studied hard, practiced endlessly, and lived inside the language until it had become part of her soul. The sentence she chose was simple, but its power was not. She looked directly at Mr. Allen and said, in perfect Chinese, "Do you need me to repeat myself for you, sir, or did you understand me the first time?" The billionaire's smirk froze. His glass stopped mid-sip. His friends stared at one another, wide-eyed, their laughter vanishing as if someone had snatched it from their throats. For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed suspended in air. No sound, no clinking glasses, no movement. Just the waitress, standing tall, speaking in a language that none of them had expected her to know, much less master. Across the room, someone let out a surprised gasp. A couple exchanged astonished looks. The little boy at the nearby table grinned wide, tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, did you hear that? She speaks Chinese." The billionaire blinked rapidly, as if his mind was struggling to catch up with what his ears had just heard. He leaned forward, squinting slightly, his arrogance cracking at the edges. What did you say?" he asked, his voice lower now, uncertain. Maya did not answer in English. She replied again in Mandarin, this time even more confidently, with a calm smile. "I asked if you need me to repeat myself, sir." The sound of her words carried across the dining hall, smooth and beautiful, silencing even the faint jazz music in the background. Murmurs spread quickly among the diners. "She's speaking Chinese. Did you hear how perfect that sounded? Unbelievable." The atmosphere had shifted completely. Only moments ago, the billionaire's table had been the center of amusement, the source of cruel entertainment. Now, that same table was the center of shock, and all the laughter had been stolen from it. Mr. Allen's face reddened slightly. He sat back in his chair, trying to recover his smugness, but the silence around him was different now. It was no longer the silence of people waiting for his next punchline, it was the silence of people judging him, watching him squirm. Maya, however, did not gloat. She did not laugh back or mock him as he had mocked her. That was not who she was. She simply stood tall, her expression calm, her words carrying a quiet dignity. She had spent years studying languages during her late nights. After finishing shifts like this one, she would sit in her small apartment with textbooks spread across her kitchen table, repeating phrases, memorizing tones, practicing until her eyelids drooped. Chinese had been her hardest challenge, but also the one she loved most. And tonight, in this restaurant filled with wealthy strangers, that hidden effort had risen like a shield around her. Her voice did not just speak words. It spoke years of sacrifice. It spoke of resilience, of nights spent hungry for knowledge while the world doubted her. It spoke of the dignity she had promised herself she would never let anyone take. The room, once filled with cruel laughter, was now alive with awe. Even some of the staff paused in their steps, their faces lit with pride, as though Maya's courage had somehow lifted them, too. Mr. Allen cleared his throat, fumbling for his glass. "Impressive," he muttered, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow, like glass cracking under pressure. "Didn't know they were teaching waitresses languages these days." His words tried to sting, but they carried no weight anymore. His mockery had lost its power the moment Maya had spoken. Because everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard it. The billionaire, with all his money, all his arrogance, had been silenced by a waitress's voice. Maya finally shifted back, her tray now in her hands again. She gave a polite nod, her face still calm. "Your appetizers will be out shortly, sir," she said this time in English, her accent clear, her voice steady. The billionaire opened his mouth, perhaps to make another joke, but nothing came out. He sat back, red-faced, his friends staring down at their plates. The power at the table had shifted, and it was no longer his. The whispers in the restaurant grew louder, not cruel this time but filled with admiration. Some customers clapped softly, others smiled warmly in her direction. It was not a loud ovation, not a grand performance, but it was real. It was respect. Maya turned and walked toward the kitchen, her steps measured, her head held high. Each movement was a quiet victory, each breath a reminder that dignity, once defended, shines brighter than gold. She did not need applause. She did not need the billionaire's approval. She had spoken for herself, and that was enough. But behind her, at the grand table in the center of the room, Mr. Allen sat in silence, his pride shattered. The man who once believed money gave him the right to mock anyone had just been reminded that respect cannot be bought and that sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one he thought beneath him. The air inside the restaurant had changed. What only minutes ago had been filled with booming laughter now pulsed with stunned silence. Maya's words in Mandarin still seemed to linger in the air, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the sound. Diners who had been busy with their meals now leaned forward, their curiosity alive. Glasses sat untouched, forks rested on plates, and every face seemed to carry the same expression: astonishment. At the center of it all, Mr. Allen sat frozen. The billionaire's usual grin had cracked into something uneasy, like glass threatening to shatter. His friends, who only moments earlier had laughed the loudest, now shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Their laughter had disappeared as quickly as it had come, leaving behind only the sharp taste of shame. One of them coughed awkwardly, breaking the heavy silence. Another reached for his drink, though his hand trembled slightly, the glass clinking against the table. They tried to act as if nothing had happened, but their eyes betrayed them. They were darting, searching, desperate to escape the humiliation that clung to their table. The billionaire cleared his throat, his fingers tightening around his wine glass. He forced a laugh, but it sounded wrong, thin, empty, like a cracked bell. "Well," he muttered, "seems our waitress has surprises." He tried to make it sound casual, as though he still held control. But his voice wavered just enough for everyone to hear the truth. Around the room, the whispers began. Quiet at first, then stronger, like a tide rising. "She speaks Mandarin. Did you hear her? That was perfect. Unbelievable." She completely silenced him. The whispers carried across tables, blending into one another until the entire restaurant seemed to hum with admiration. For once, the power was not in the hands of the billionaire with his expensive suit and smug smile. It was in the hands of the waitress he had tried to humiliate. Maya did not look back at him. She had no need to. Her point had been made, and it echoed louder than any insult ever could. She carried her tray with steady steps, her head high, her posture calm. The little boy who had been watching her earlier clapped quietly at his table, and his mother, though embarrassed, smiled faintly as well. It was a small gesture, but it carried warmth, like a spark in the cold silence. The manager of the restaurant, standing by the bar, was wide-eyed. He had known Maya as hard-working, reliable, and polite. But tonight, he saw her differently. He saw a woman who carried strength far beyond what her uniform suggested. Back at the table, Mr. Allen tried to recover his composure. He leaned back in his chair, forcing a smirk as he glanced at his friends. "Come now, gentlemen," he said, his voice louder than before, "we're here to enjoy dinner, not language lessons." He chuckled again, but the sound fell flat. Not one of his friends returned the laugh with the same energy. Their smiles were tight, awkward, and their eyes avoided his. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Allen felt something unusual. The room was not with him. The attention he once craved, the spotlight he demanded, was no longer flattering. It was heavy, suffocating. Every whisper, every sideways glance, was a reminder that his power had slipped. Maya, meanwhile, moved calmly between tables, refilling glasses, delivering plates, her composure unbroken. But inside, she felt the shift too. The humiliation she had carried moments before had transformed into something else: respect, quiet but undeniable. The sting had turned into a victory, not because she had embarrassed him, but because she had shown the truth: dignity does not need wealth to shine. At another table near the back, a woman raised her glass toward Maya as she passed. It was not loud, not dramatic, but it was deliberate. A silent gesture of respect. Maya gave a small nod in return, her lips curling into the faintest smile. The shock wave continued to ripple outward. Customers who had been silent now whispered louder. Staff members who had been too afraid to intervene exchanged proud looks. Even the chef, who peeked from the kitchen doorway, shook his head with a grin before disappearing back inside. But the man at the center of the storm could not escape it. Mr. Allen shifted again in his chair, tugging at his cufflinks, his arrogance crumbling with every second. He was a man used to controlling rooms, bending people with money and status. Yet here he was, stripped of that power by a single sentence in a language he didn't understand. It was not just embarrassment. It was exposure. The billionaire had been revealed, not as strong, but as small. And worse, everyone had seen it. His friends tried to distract themselves with food, suddenly very interested in their plates. But the taste had gone from their mouths. The wine, once rich, now felt bitter. The laughter that had seemed endless earlier was gone, leaving only the sound of clinking cutlery and the quiet hum of admiration directed at Maya. When she returned to their table with the appetizers, her face was calm, professional, untouched by the storm she had stirred. She placed each dish carefully, her movements smooth. Then she looked at Mr. Allen for the first time since speaking Mandarin. Her gaze was steady, respectful but unshaken. "Your appetizers, sir," she said simply, her English clear, her voice strong. There was no mockery in her tone. No arrogance. Just dignity. Mr. Allen opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. He simply nodded, his face flushed, his eyes cast briefly downward. The man who had laughed the loudest now had nothing left to say. The shock wave had reached him fully. As Maya walked away, a quiet applause rose from a corner table. It was hesitant at first, then grew stronger, others joining in. It was not loud enough to turn the restaurant into a stage, but it was enough to send the message clearly: respect had shifted. The billionaire's table, once the loudest in the room, now sat in silence. And Maya, with each step she took, carried the weight of her victory lightly, like it was simply another tray balanced in her hands. Because for her, it wasn't about winning. It was about standing tall. And she had done exactly that. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm, but it was not the same rhythm as before. The clinking of glasses and soft jazz had lost their careless tone. Now, every sound carried an edge of awareness, as though everyone in the room understood that they had just witnessed something unusual. Maya moved calmly, her tray balanced in her steady hands, her expression unchanged. But inside her chest, her heart still pulsed fast, not from fear but from the release of power she had held back for too long. She had chosen her moment, and now the air itself seemed lighter. At the bar, the restaurant manager, Mr. Collins, watched her carefully. He was a man in his 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed little. For 2 years, he had seen Maya arrive early, leave late, and carry herself with discipline beyond her years. He had always admired her dedication, but tonight he realized there was much more beneath the surface. When she came to the bar to collect a fresh tray, he leaned slightly closer. His voice was low, but his words carried genuine curiosity. "Maya," he said, "where did you learn to speak like that?" She paused, surprised by the question. For a moment, she thought about brushing it off with a polite answer, but then she saw the sincerity in his eyes. He was not mocking her, he truly wanted to know. Her lips curved into a small, almost secretive smile. "At night," she replied softly. "When most people were asleep." The manager tilted his head, puzzled. "At night?" Maya nodded. "I worked here in the evenings, and before this job I had another one during the day. But after the shifts ended, I would go home and study. Sometimes until sunrise. I saved what I could to buy old textbooks and language CDs. I wanted to learn something more, something beyond what people expected of me." Mr. Collins blinked, impressed. "And Mandarin was one of them?" "Yes," Maya answered. Her eyes held a quiet fire as she continued, "People always told me that my accent made me sound less. I wanted to prove, if not to them, then to myself, that my voice could hold power. Learning languages gave me that power. Mandarin was the hardest, so I made it my challenge. If I could learn that, I could learn anything." The manager's lips parted slightly, then closed. For once, he had no quick reply. He simply nodded with respect, as though seeing her in a new light. But Maya's mind drifted further back, beyond the walls of the restaurant, beyond this one night. She thought of her small apartment, with books stacked high on the kitchen counter. She thought of the nights she sat at her table with a cup of cheap coffee, repeating tones again and again until her voice went hoarse. She thought of how her neighbors, through the thin walls, sometimes teased her for talking to herself at odd hours. But she had ignored them. Because each word she mastered was a victory. Each phrase she learned was a shield against the voices of doubt. And Mandarin was not the only language. French, Spanish, even fragments of Arabic. Maya had collected them all, piece by piece, like treasures no one could steal. They were hers alone, earned not by wealth or privilege, but by endless hours of persistence. The customers could not see the story, of course. To them, she was simply a waitress who had shocked a billionaire with a hidden skill. But to Maya, the truth was much deeper. Her voice was not an accident, not a trick. It was the result of sacrifice, nights of exhaustion, mornings of doubt, and a promise she had made to herself long ago. She had promised she would never let the world decide her worth. As she returned to the tables, balancing plates with her usual grace, she overheard the whispers. Not cruel now, but curious and impressed. "Did you hear her? I thought only diplomats or business people could speak like that. She must be brilliant." The whispers could not erase the sting of the earlier mockery, but they softened it. They wrapped around her like a reminder that dignity, once shown, had the power to rewrite a room. Meanwhile, at the billionaire's table, the weight of silence grew heavier. Mr. Allen sat stiffly, his eyes fixed on his plate, his fork moving food he had no appetite for. His friends, once his audience, avoided his gaze. They were businessmen too, men who respected strength when they saw it, and tonight, the strength had not come from the man with the biggest bank account. When Maya passed their table again, one of the friends cleared his throat. "That was impressive," he said quietly. His tone was not mocking, it was almost respectful, though awkward. Maya nodded politely but did not slow her steps. She owed them nothing. In the back of her mind, she remembered the boy at the nearby table. He had been watching everything. She wondered if he would remember this moment when he grew older, if he would recall the night he saw a waitress stand tall against laughter, and how she answered not with anger but with knowledge. Perhaps he would. And perhaps that memory would plant something inside him, a seed of understanding that respect is not decided by accent, skin, or wealth, but by the strength a person carries in their heart. The truth of Maya's life was not glamorous. She still lived in a tiny apartment, still worked long hours, still counted coins carefully before paying bills. But she carried something wealth could not buy: resilience. And tonight, for the first time, that truth had been revealed before strangers. She did not need applause. She did not need recognition. She only needed to keep moving forward, to keep proving to herself most of all that she was more than anyone's mockery. And though the billionaire sat quietly, his pride broken, Maya did not think of him anymore. Her thoughts were already ahead, on the next language she wanted to learn, the next challenge she would face, the next night she would sit at her kitchen table with a book and whisper words into the silence until they became her own. Because the truth was this: Maya's strength did not come from the victory of silencing a cruel man. It came from the years of struggle that no one had seen, the nights of determination that built her voice into what it was now. And that truth, at last, had been revealed. Mr. Allen had never been a man who enjoyed silence, especially not silence directed at him. He was used to rooms bending to his presence, to laughter following his jokes, to admiration flooding every corner when he spoke. But tonight, the silence was different. It pressed on him like a weight he could not lift. His expensive suit felt tighter, his glass of wine felt bitter, and for the first time in years, his power had slipped through his fingers. He shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening as he glanced around the restaurant. Eyes turned away quickly, but he could feel them, every whisper, every glance, every hidden smirk. The billionaire who had once been untouchable now sat exposed. His friends, once his loyal chorus, poked at their food awkwardly. The laughter that had spilled so freely earlier had dried up, leaving only discomfort. Mr. Allen was not a man who gave up easily. His pride was too large, his ego too sharp. He straightened his back, forcing his usual smirk to return. If the room thought they had seen the end of him, they were wrong. He leaned forward, placing his glass firmly on the table with a sharp clink. "Waitress," he called, his voice louder than necessary. Conversations across the room faltered again. Maya turned gracefully, carrying another tray toward a nearby table. Her steps did not falter, her face did not shift. She placed the tray down, excused herself politely, and then walked toward him with steady steps. When she arrived at his table, she stood tall, her posture professional but unyielding. "Yes, sir?" she asked. Mr. Allen leaned back in his chair, trying to regain the upper hand. He raised an eyebrow, as though he were in control again. "Tell me," he said with a sly grin, "do you also speak French? Or maybe Japanese? Let's see what other tricks you have. Entertain us." The words were meant to sting, to turn her dignity into a show, to remind her of her place. His friends looked at him nervously, unsure whether to laugh or remain silent. But Maya did not flinch. She folded her hands in front of her and tilted her head slightly, meeting his eyes with calm strength. Her voice was even, steady, but it carried weight. "Sir," she said, "I am not here to entertain you. I am here to serve with respect. But respect works both ways." The words landed in the air like stones dropped into still water. Ripples spread instantly. At the next table, a woman gasped softly. A man nodded faintly, his lips curving into the beginnings of a smile. The boy at the nearby table clapped once before his mother hushed him quickly. The staff behind the bar exchanged quick, proud glances. Mr. Allen's smirk faltered, but he pushed again. He could not accept defeat so easily. "Respect," he repeated, his tone mocking. "You think you can lecture me about respect? Do you know who I am?" Maya did not look away. "Yes," she said simply. "You are a man with wealth. But wealth is not respect. How you treat others is." Her words were not loud, but they carried through the restaurant with clarity. Everyone heard them. And in that moment, the power that had once belonged to the billionaire was gone. It belonged to her. For the first time that evening, Mr. Allen could not find an answer. His throat tightened, his mind scrambling for words, but none came. His friends shifted uncomfortably again, avoiding his eyes, their loyalty cracking under the weight of his humiliation. Maya did not linger. She gave a polite nod and stepped back, her calm presence leaving behind an even deeper silence. She did not need to raise her voice or insult him. The truth she had spoken was sharp enough. Around the room, the tide had turned completely. The customers no longer feared the billionaire's presence. They admired the young waitress instead. Her dignity, her strength, her refusal to bend it was more powerful than money, more powerful than arrogance. Mr. Collins, the manager, stood straighter by the bar, pride shining in his usually stern eyes. He had managed restaurants for decades, seen countless staff members come and go. But never had he seen one of his own command a room the way Maya just had. Back at the table, Mr. Allen gripped his glass again, but his hand trembled slightly. He tried to drink, but the wine burned his throat. His friends spoke quietly among themselves, their voices low, their eyes darting anywhere but at him. For the first time, he felt not like the center of power but like a man cornered, stripped of his usual armor. Maya continued her work. She moved gracefully between tables, smiling warmly at customers who nodded at her, thanking her with more than just words. She felt their respect now, quiet but strong. She knew the billionaire would never apologize. Men like him rarely did. But his silence was enough. His arrogance had been broken, his control undone. And she had done it not by shouting, not by anger, but by standing in dignity, by showing that respect cannot be bought with money or forced with power. As she passed the table once more, she glanced at him one last time. His eyes met hers briefly, and in that instant, he looked away. That was the turning point. The billionaire, who once commanded rooms with laughter and arrogance, had been silenced not by wealth, not by another powerful man, but by a waitress who refused to bow. And the truth of that silence was louder than any words he could ever say. The night carried on, but the restaurant was no longer the same place it had been when Mr. Allen first walked in. The laughter that once filled the air had vanished, replaced by quiet admiration and a sense of balance restored. The golden light of the chandeliers no longer seemed to shine on him, it seemed instead to glow gently on the young waitress who had turned the evening into something unforgettable. Maya moved between tables with the same calm grace she had carried from the start of her shift. Her uniform was the same, her tasks were the same, but to the eyes watching her now, she was no longer just another waitress. She was a woman who had stood tall against mockery and won without raising her voice, without anger, without cruelty. At her touch, plates were delivered, glasses refilled, but her presence carried something more dignity. People looked at her with newfound respect. A couple smiled at her warmly. A man near the back nodded in quiet acknowledgement when she passed. Even those who said nothing watched her with admiration in their eyes. At the center of the room, however, sat a man who had lost more than his appetite. Mr. Allen shifted in his chair, his expensive suit no longer feeling like armor but like a costume he could not escape. His friends, once eager to laugh with him, now avoided his gaze. Their voices were low, awkward, trying to carry on with conversation but failing. The billionaire lifted his glass once more, but the wine did not comfort him. Every sip tasted bitter, every sound reminded him of what had happened. He had mocked her accent, tried to turn her into entertainment, tried to force her into silence. Instead, she had spoken in perfect Chinese, silenced him, and shown everyone in the room who truly held strength. And worse, everyone had seen it. For men like Mr. Allen, reputation was everything. Wealth could buy many things, but it could not erase memory. The whispers in the room, the admiration for Maya, the silence of his friends, it all pressed down on him harder than the weight of money ever could. He leaned forward, trying to reassemble his composure, but no one looked at him anymore. The spotlight had shifted, and he could not pull it back. Maya, meanwhile, felt no need to gloat. Victory for her was not about his humiliation. Victory was about standing firm when the world tried to push her down. Victory was about leaving her shift with her head high, about knowing she had defended her dignity not just for herself but for everyone who had ever been laughed at for being different. When she stepped into the kitchen for a moment, the other staff members looked at her with pride. One of the younger waitresses whispered, "That was incredible, Maya." Another nodded, adding, "You didn't just serve tonight, you showed all of us something bigger." Maya smiled faintly, humbled but not surprised. She had not spoken for applause, nor for admiration. She had spoken because it was necessary. Because dignity cannot always stay silent. As the evening came closer to its end, customers began leaving one by one. Many stopped by the bar to compliment the service, but a few glanced back at Maya with quiet respect before stepping out into the night. The little boy who had watched everything waved at her shyly as he left with his mother. Maya waved back, her smile soft. Perhaps he would remember this moment, perhaps it would stay with him the way her own memories of humiliation had stayed with her, but this time as a lesson of courage. Finally, only a few tables remained, including the billionaire's. His friends settled their bills quickly, eager to leave the uncomfortable air. But Mr. Allen lingered, as though leaving would mean admitting the truth he could not face. He drummed his fingers against the table, restless, trapped in a silence of his own making. When Maya approached one last time to clear the plates, she moved with her usual professionalism. She stacked the dishes neatly, balanced the tray, and stood tall. "Thank you for dining with us tonight, sir," she said calmly. Her words were simple, polite, and professional. But to Mr. Allen, they carried the weight of finality. He opened his mouth to reply, but no clever remark came. No arrogant smirk followed. All he managed was a stiff nod. For once, the billionaire had no voice. And that was the greatest victory of all. As Maya walked away, the moment closed like a curtain on a stage. She had not shouted, she had not fought, she had not bowed. She had simply stood tall, spoken her truth, and let dignity do the rest. When her shift ended later that night, she stepped out into the cool air of the city. The streets glimmered with lights, cars hummed by, and the noise of life returned. She wrapped her coat around herself and walked steadily toward her small apartment. Her feet were sore, her body tired, but her heart was light. She thought of her textbooks waiting at home, the pages marked with notes, the sticky tabs pressed into corners. She thought of the languages she had yet to master, the words she still wanted to learn. She thought of the future she was building piece by piece, night after night. Because for Maya, tonight was not the end of something, it was only another step forward. The billionaire would return to his mansion, his wealth untouched but his pride wounded. He would sit among his riches, remembering the night he had been silenced by a waitress. And though he might never admit it, he would not forget. But Maya would carry something far greater than money. She would carry the memory of a night where she stood firm, where she proved to herself and to everyone watching that respect cannot be mocked away, and dignity cannot be bought. And as she walked down the quiet street, her head held high, the city lights reflected in her steady eyes. She had won not through wealth, not through power, but through the strength of her spirit. That was her victory.